So today is February 23rd, 2024. The interviewee is Carl Wettstein. The interviewer is Paula Treef. We're in Rochester, New York in the United States, and the language for the interview will be English. Hi, I am Paula Treef. I'll be interviewing Carl Wettstein today. We're in Rochester, New York in the United States. It's February 23rd, 2024, and the interview will be in English. Good morning. Thank you for doing the interview today. Could you please state your name and spell it?
Carl Wettstein, C-A-R-L, the last name W-E-T-Z-S-T-E-I-N.
And that was your name at birth as well, yes?
It was spelled differently.
How would you spell it?
It was spelled C-A-R-E-L. When I became a United States citizen, I took the E out because not to confuse people.
And when were you born?
August 25th, 1938.
And that makes your current age?
95. Oh, I'm sorry, 85.
Okay. And in what city and country were you born? And could you spell this?
Enschede, Holland.
Excuse me?
Enschede, Holland.
And can you spell that?
The city?
The city?
E-S-N-S-C-H-E-D-E.
Holland, yes. And your family members, could you give us the name of your father?
Benno Wettstein.
And your mother?
Sonia Wettstein de Louis.
Louis was her maiden name?
Yes.
Great. And did you have any siblings?
No.
Okay. And in your immediate family household before the war started, were there any other family members living with you, grandparents?
No.
Or... Okay. And your parents, what was your father's profession?
He was in business. He was born in Germany, where they, in a very small village, and a family operated like a general store. And in a small village, that's like, a big department store here.
Right.
Okay, so he came to to Holland in 1933 when Hitler came to power, and found a job and was very smart. He married the boss's daughter.
Married the what?
The boss's daughter.
Boss's daughter, your mother. Do you remember the town in Germany that he was from?
There was two towns. He was born in Gießen, G-I-E-S-S-E-N, and that's a town, and he lived in a small village, Kesselbach.
Okay. So I wanted to ask you about your life as it was for you before the war experience began. I know you were very young at the time. So could you just give me like the earliest memory you have of your mother? Was it pre-war or was it during the war?
During the war, I think.
During the war. And your father as well?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll talk about that in a little bit. Do you know anything about life in the town that you lived in before the war? Not obviously not from your own memories, but just what you were told about your father's business or about Jewish life there?
Well, it's only from what I know after I grew up. Okay, but we lived, the town that I was born in and lived in for part of the time was a large industrial town. Large in Holland is like 100,000 people. Okay, but it was an industrial town, a textile center. Okay.
And that's where your father had the store?
Pardon me?
And that's where your father got the job, I'm sorry. He got the job there. And do you know anything about what Jewish life was like in this town?
Well, there was a synagogue there. Only one synagogue was was an Orthodox synagogue.
It was an Orthodox synagogue?
Yes. We weren't Orthodox, but that's the only synagogue there was. No, remember, after the war, my parents were involved, active in the synagogue.
In that same synagogue? So, do you know anything about like how the Jews and non-Jews got along before?
I don't really know.
Okay. Anything else that you know? Like you said, you learned it afterwards, but anything else that you know about the town, the life there?
It was, one of the larger towns in Holland, about thousand people. Industrial textiles,
Okay.
industry.
So I asked you about your earliest memory. So what was your earliest memory then?
I don't know, but I do remember going bicycling with my father, but this was early in the war, so it couldn't have been much older than maybe 3 or 4 years old, which is possible because my father was in the bicycle business, so it's possible that
Nice.
he had me riding a bicycle. But at 3 or 4, it's still pretty young.
Yeah, he's pretty young. And how about your mom, your earliest memory of her?
I'm not sure. Actually, earliest memory is probably when she picked me up after the war.
After the war. Okay. So can you tell the story about what happened to your family once the Nazis came in, and then what progressed after that?
Okay, well, the standard story in Holland is they moved in and they started putting restrictions on the Jews, and they moved in 1940. Okay, so until 1942, it was just basically putting restrictions on, where they could shop, where they taking their bicycles away, places that could go, like movies and parks.
So restrictions on movement. The Jews had
right, and they couldn't have bicycles, stuff like that. So that was early on until 1942 when they started. Then they decided.
And in those years, your dad still worked in the bicycle shop, and life was.
Pardon me?
Life wasn't normal because you were limited, but it wasn't dangerous. Was it dangerous?
I don't think so. Not that I know of specifically.
Right. And then what happened?
Well, then in 1942, the Nazis decided to do their roundups. Okay, and they were telling people, you're going to the camps, but these are work camps and you'll be all right. My father was born in Germany. He had seen Hitler up close, and he knew better. Okay, so they, I don't know how they did it, but they got in contact with the resistance, probably through people in the Jewish community that knew that. So it's always an amazing story to me how courageous they were, my parents, that is, because one day a man came to the house and he said, "I'm here to pick up your son. Okay, if you let me take him, then he has a good chance of surviving the war. But you have to do it right. You have to decide right now, I'm going to send him with you." That's a tremendous act of courage on the part of my parents.
And faith and trust. Mm-hmm. Do you remember that, or that's the story?
No, I don't remember that specifically, no.
But that's what they told you?
Yeah.
So they said yes?
Yeah, and there's one person, I don't know him, but I've heard him talk. Exact same story happened to him. His parents said no, and they all wound up in a camp in Holland. They survived the war, but they said no. Okay, where my parents, I think, was a tremendously courageous thing to do.
Definitely.
I mean, he didn't give him any choice. He said, right now, okay, I'm not coming back tomorrow, right now. Mm-hmm. I'd never seen this man before.
That is very brave. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So he took you.
Yeah.
And where did he take you?
So at first I was placed with a family, our family's 3 sisters, in the town where we lived. And again, that's Enschede, it's an industrial town, so it's not a particularly safe town. You couldn't go outside. The Allies were bombing factories around there, and I remember one particular time they were bombing while we were eating dinner, and we all jumped underneath the table to protect ourselves.
So these three sisters that you remember that time with them?
Yeah.
You do?
Well, that's what I'm saying is that the specific incident I remember
Yeah, yeah.
there is having dinner and the bombs came and we jumped below the underneath the table to protect ourselves. And I remember we eating some sort of cabbage with a sausage. So it's crazy. That's stuff you remember, but that's what I do.
It sticks in your head. So it was just you and these three sisters?
Yeah, and no, again, it's a bigger town, so you couldn't go outside. Okay. I think I'm not sure, but I think at times we did go into a bomb shelter, but I couldn't guarantee that. But
And you have the names of those sisters, I think.
yeah.
Could you share the names of those
No,
sisters?
let me. So the names were Akka and Thokya and Dean
And their last name?
Navain.
Can you spell that?
N-A-W-I-J-N.
Thank you. So do you know how long you stayed with them?
I'm not sure. Probably a year or so.
Oh.
I'm not really sure. Okay.
And so you didn't go outside, you said?
No.
You don't know how they explained who you were to people, or
I doubt it. It had explained to anything. They were hiding me. So.
they just you were just hidden, really?
Yeah. But at times, so I can't say for sure what happened, but at times we were in bomb shelters, so there must have been other people there.
Right.
But I can't tell you what they said or how that worked.
So was that a very scary time?
Pardon me?
Was that a very scary time?
I don't think I knew enough to be scared at that point.
Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of doing the years in my head. This is 1942.
1942.
So you were like...
I was 3.5 at that point.
3.5. Yeah, just a kid. So you were in with these three sisters, just you, and sometimes when there were bombs, you'd have to go to a bomb shelter. Otherwise you really didn't leave the house.
That's right.
Yeah. And then what was the next thing that happened?
Well, the sisters decided this was not really a good arrangement. So they sent me off to their brother, who lived in a small rural community in northern Holland. Mm-hmm. And so he told his neighbors that I simply was a nephew coming from, quote, the big city where it wasn't safe or there wasn't food. And so I became part of their family. Okay.
And what was his name?
Pardon me?
What was that?
Okay, so his name was Jan.
Jan, and the same.
Jan. And his wife was Lolke, Lolkje.
And the same last name, Nawin.
Yes.
You're saying. And the town was?
Bolsward, Bolsward.
Bolsward. So what do you remember of life there?
I was part of the family, so the thing was I was able to live out in the open because I simply told their neighbors I was a nephew, came from a big city where it wasn't safe. So I was simply living out in the open, going to school, going to church with them. Mm-hmm. Okay, and that's an important point because you hear all the stories about the Holocaust and people being hidden in terrible conditions, and I lived just as normal a life as possible. Okay, under the circumstances. Mm-hmm. I was out in the open, lived with them, went to school, went to church with them.
They were Catholic?
Protestant.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so I remember some time ago I went to a conference of hidden children where older people talked and they told the horrible stories the way they lived. So again, I'm so grateful that I lived as normal a life as possible under the circumstances. Okay, was able to live with these people. I went to school. I went to church with them. Was outside.
Went outside, you weren't
So
trapped.
I'm tremendously, compared to anybody else during the war, I had a much better situation than anyone else that I can think of.
Did you, I mean, because you were so little when you went, did you know that this was not your family? Like, did you remember your parents? And
I know it was not my family. They gave me a new name.
what was the
Okay.
name they gave
Pardon
you?
me?
What was the name they gave you?
Rose, like the Dutch spelling, R-O-O-S.
Okay. But still Carl.
Yeah.
And so you knew that wasn't your name.
Yes. Yes.
And did you remember your parents at that point?
Not so much. When my mother came to pick me up after the war, I knew immediately who she was when she walked in the door. Okay. When I got back, when she took me back home, I didn't recognize my father. I didn't know who he was at that point.
Yes, I want to ask you more about that. But staying with when you were Carl Ross, did anyone tell you? I'm not sure exactly how to ask this question. It just seems like because of your age, you would not know that you were hiding, that you had to hide. Did anyone say to you, like, don't say that you have different parents?
I don't remember
Yeah.
anybody saying that.
And do you remember any time that you were at risk because of being Jewish? You know, like somebody asked about it, or
Well, I can't tell that. I know at one time I got sick and I had to call a doctor who would obviously be able to figure out I was Jewish.
yeah,
But I guess that came out okay.
yeah. So you
And
never felt threatened.
I have one memory of walking into a building, either maybe a library or a railroad station, and being confronted by a German soldier, and not quite at ease, but we just sort of stared at each other and went our separate ways. But I do remember that incident.
So you knew that there was a reason to be afraid of them. Of course, they
Yeah.
had invaded Holland too, so even the Dutch
Yeah.
were afraid of them. So you lived this normal life. You didn't feel threatened, and you're grateful
Right.
for that. And then you said that at some point your mother came. You knew there was a war going on, or I don't know.
Well, by that time the war was over.
Right.
Okay.
No, when your mother came, the war was over. But you understood that this was a war situation.
Yeah, well, there wasn't really much. There was no war activity where we
this
lived
little
there,
town.
but I do remember at the very end of the war, the Germans evacuated the town, blew up a couple of bridges across the canals, and they were followed by the Canadian Army, which brought them back. I don't know where they went, but the Germans left town, and the Canadians got them back and marched them off wherever they
So
were.
the Canadians were the kind of liberators of the
Yeah.
town. And then tell me about when your mother came.
Well, she came, and actually she came in the house, and I immediately knew who she was.
You knew she
Okay.
was your mother.
Yeah,
What did that feel like for you?
it felt good, you know. Then we had to go back. Went back. We had to hitchhike back to where we were living, and I didn't remember my father, or when I saw him, I didn't recognize him.
So your mother comes in. You knew it was Mom. She knew it was you.
Yeah,
Did you have any feelings about leaving this other family?
I don't remember having any, but no.
And then you hitchhiked back to where your father was.
Yeah.
And you didn't recognize him. And did that change, or was it just like kind
Pardon
of
me?
getting to know him? Did that change? Like, you start to remember
Oh
him?
yeah.
Or did it just...
Oh yeah. Afterwards.
Okay. And what did you learn about how your parents survived?
They lived pretty much like Anne Frank lived, and so that goes back to when the resistance came and picked me up, because you remember I was like 3.5 years old. You can't put a child that young into a situation like Anne Frank, and they pretty much lived like that after when they went into hiding.
So they were living in some apartment or hidden away?
Yeah, I don't know much of the details, but
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you know who helped them?
No, I don't.
So you had this reunion with your parents.
Pardon me?
You say you had this reunion with your parents. The war is over.
Yeah.
And then what happened after that?
Okay, so one thing I remember my grandparents were in the concentration camps and they came back, and I remember them coming to the house and just looking like walking skeletons.
Wow. These are your mother's parents, your father's parents?
My mother's parents.
Mother's parents. And their names were?
Abraham and Lena DeLuey.
Mm-hmm. And do you know what camp they were in?
I think they were in Theresienstadt, but I'm not 100% sure.
Mm-hmm. So they survived Theresienstadt,
Yeah.
or wherever the camp was, and they found you.
Yeah.
So what town were you in at that point?
I'm sorry, what?
What town were you in?
In our hometown, Enschede, where I was born and where we lived before the war.
Mm-hmm. Back in your own original house?
Not at that time, but we did move back into that house later.
You were able to move back?
Yeah, that was my grandparents' house.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know the details of that, but at the time when my grandparents came back, we weren't living that, but eventually wound up back in their house.
And I guess I want to ask you about the people who saved you. I know that's something you want to talk about. How do you understand it? These, you know that they're recognized as righteous Gentiles, and I wonder what your thoughts are about that.
Well, I've given talk. I've given talk on righteous Gentiles because they're important. Okay, and most of the people who go out and talk about their experiences, they talk about the camps that they were living in. I went out and I wanted to talk about the righteous Gentiles, so it's important to me to share that kind of information.
Mm-hmm. Why is it important?
Because you hear so much about people not helping and Jews winding up in concentration camps. That's a part of the story that needs to be told. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Did you ever see them again after you left with your mother?
Well, I saw before we came to the States, the United States, I did see them again, yes.
Tell me about that a little. How did that happen?
We just went to visit. Okay, in other words, we were living in the same town, so I would go. Mm-hmm. Well, in the original town, the Three Sisters, in the smaller town where the brother lived, I think I went back once to talk to them. That's about it.
So when you said you like to talk about the righteous Gentiles, do you have any, I don't know if it's a theory or any impressions about why they were taking a huge risk to save the Jewish child?
When you ask them, okay, they invariably the answer that they give is, why do you ask? Okay, we can't do anything else. That's the general answer that you get.
They're surprised that you're asking, mm-hmm. You're saying?
Yeah.
Because to them it didn't seem extraordinary, or?
They felt that they had to do it. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Just because of their values, or?
Yeah, I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but in my talk, I got a quote from a woman named Anna Samatai, who was a librarian, and she says, when I saw that I had to do it. I couldn't do anything else. I was ashamed that I wasn't Jewish myself. Okay, so giving that reason, but most of them just said, "Why do you ask?" Okay.
Interesting. And I know that you went through the process of having them recognized as mm-hmm. righteous Gentiles at Yad Vashem in Israel. Why was that important to you?
It's important that people be recognized for having done that. Okay, it's a tremendous risk that they took because they were, if they were caught, they'd be killed just the same as the Jews were. Okay.
Yeah. So you feel like it doesn't get enough attention, that whole issue doesn't get enough attention. And you wanted to make sure that the Nawin family
Yeah.
were recognized. That's great. So then after the war, your family's together, your parents and your one set of grandparents, the other grandparents.
Well, these were my mother's parents. My father's father died in 1930 before the war. And my father's mother was with his sister, and they survived the war, but I don't know where they were.
And then how long did you continue to live in Holland before you came to the United
We
States?
came to the United States in 1953.
53. So during those years in Holland, from 45 or so to 53, you were living a life of a Dutch boy,
Yes.
going to school, and did your parents talk to you then at all about the war? Or
No.
it was just
Very, very little talk about the war. It didn't really register with me until the 1970s, I would say. After that, I sort of said, okay, we survived the war. We were in hiding. Everybody survived that way. Well, I figured, I didn't figure that out much until the 70s.
started to become aware of in the 70s. So when you came here in 53, how did you come? By boat?
Yeah.
What, do you remember the boat name, the name of the boat?
The boat's name was Nieuw Amsterdam, which in English would be New Amsterdam.
And through Ellis Island?
No, Ellis Island was closed up by that point.
Okay.
We came in through Hoboken,
Oh.
New Jersey.
The port of Hoboken, yeah. And how did you end up here in Rochester?
Well, my father had cousins here, so they sponsored us.
So you came right away to Rochester. You didn't
Yeah.
go someplace else first.
Pardon me?
You didn't go someplace else first.
No.
They sponsored you. You came to Rochester. So at that point, 1953, you are how old?
15.
15. You didn't speak English, I'm assuming.
Pardon me?
You didn't speak English before you came here, or did you?
Yes, I didn't speak English. I had 2 years of high school English. Okay, and I'm tremendously grateful, okay, that they didn't make any accommodations for me when I was in school. In other words, the language here is English, sink or swim. Okay, and I'm tremendously grateful that that's the way it was,
Why is that?
because I was able to develop English pretty much. Very few people, when they talk to me, pick up the fact that English is not my native language.
True, that's true. So
So-
you sink or swim, and you swam.
Yeah. I remember this. I think during very early on, during one of the first weeks in school, my teacher, English teacher, had me write an essay about myself, in English, of course. But it's very important, I think, that happened.
Did you have any struggles as now you're an immigrant coming into the United States?
Not
Not
really.
much with the language you're saying. So,
Pardon me?
you know, with the other children or the people that you met here.
No, I think the difficulty was I went to high school, that's fine. When I graduated, I went to college. I didn't really realize what the college situation was, and I started out in a fraternity, and I was there for a couple of weeks, and then the guy told me to leave. They didn't want me. And I never thought about it at that point, but he said, well, it's not because you're Jewish. It never occurred to me, it wouldn't have occurred to me if he hadn't said that. Okay. So it could be that I simply was not used to, the college situation here. New to relatively new to the country, and so that I wouldn't. It could be simply that I didn't fit into the sort of the fraternity life. But he said, it's not because you're Jewish.
What college did you go to?
At first, the General Motors Institute, and then RIT, and eventually the U of R.
So you weren't thinking it was an anti-Semitic, but the fact that he raised that made you wonder.
No.
Makes you wonder.
I think it was a thing that, I was new to the country towards maybe 3 years here, and simply didn't know about the fraternity scene and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's a lot to adjust to, adapt to. And as you said, your family didn't really talk about the war, and it wasn't kind of weighing on you really. You weren't really thinking about it. You're here in America. You're making your way. Family's making their way in Rochester, and then you went to the U of R for graduate school.
Well, that was after. That was much later.
Oh.
Okay. I went to General Motors Institute, graduated from RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology, and then after that, I went to the U of R to get my master's.
Like from RIT, or you meant?
Maybe a couple of years in between.
Okay. And you got your degree. What your degree is?
And industrial statistics.
Industrial
statistics.
Statistics. Okay. And then you started working.
Yeah.
And what kind of work did you do?
Well, I started out as a statistician, but I was learning the trade as in other words, I was going to school studying statistics at the U of R while I was working as a statistician.
I see. So working and learning at the same time. And then you worked for, where did you work?
Well, again, I was talking about being lucky. Okay. Out of high school, I got into a work-study program at General Motors Institute, and then finished it at RIT, and it's alternating half work, half study. So that was a tremendous education, because during the work sessions, I worked in every conceivable part of the plant. So it was a tremendous experience to prepare me for, even after I became a statistician, I was able to talk to a lot of...
Because you knew what it was like in all these different departments.
And the whole thing, the education was first of all, it was a tremendous education, but the other part was all free. Okay, General Motors paid for my undergraduate degree, and Kodak paid for my graduate degree. So no student loans.
That's great. That's great. So being in America has been good for you.
Yes, absolutely.
Really good opportunities. Do you remember when you came, when you were 15? Was it frightening to be here? Like, what was your emotional reaction then?
I don't think I was frightened, no.
Or excited, or not excited? Just, this is the next step?
I don't remember being either frightened or...
Okay, all right. So, what about in terms of your personal life, since you became an adult here in the States? I know you were married, so could you tell us the story about that, how you met your wife and your children?
Well, okay, as part of the Jewish community, there was a young couple, not a couples group, a singles group called the 2030 Club at the local JY. That's where I met my wife.
How old were you then?
22, something like that.
So she was Jewish. You were.
Yes.
And did she work outside of the home?
Yeah, she was a school teacher at Charlotte High School here.
And you had children?
We have one son, biological son, and then later on we adopted.
And what are their names?
Pardon me?
And what are their names? How old are they?
Jeffrey is, he's 60, yeah, this year. So he was born in 64, so that makes him exactly 60. And my older son, who's adopted, is 62 at this point.
And you said that you were part of the Jewish community. That's how you met your wife. Have you been involved in the Jewish community ever since, during your adulthood, or?
Yeah, well, I was very active in our Temple Emmanuel, here in Rochester. I started that, when was it? 1969, I think. And I was very active, involved, held almost any leadership position over the years, and sort of started, maybe in 2019 it started to go down. But for those 50 years, I was actively involved, doing many things, being president of the temple on 3 separate occasions.
So it was important to you to be involved in the Jewish community.
Yeah.
Do you think that had anything to do with your experiences during the war? Or, some people, when they came out of those experiences, kind of turned away from organized Judaism.
No, I don't. I was just started out, I started out with a single group where I met my wife, and then we joined the temple and we got involved.
And your boys were bar mitzvahed and...
Yeah.
So, and your wife has passed away, is that right?
Yes.
When did she pass away?
2014.
Sorry. Did you talk about so your wife, she was not a survivor. Was your wife a survivor? No.
No.
So did you talk about your experiences with your wife or your sons?
Not much, some, but not really much.
Is that, I guess, well, the question really is like, how much have you shared before today? I know that you've given talks, and you said that that's important, and it's important to, mostly because you want to emphasize the righteous Gentile situation.
My wife was more involved with the talks.
Your wife was?
Well, she knew more about it than the kids did, because I didn't start giving them until kids were older.
You didn't start giving the talks until the kids were older?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my wife knew more about it than the kids did.
Yeah, because of the even before. What were their reactions, your wife, when you did either share your experiences? Did it seem to have an effect on them, or?
I don't think so.
Not your sons?
I don't think they could really relate.
Say it again?
I don't really think they could relate.
Relate to it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you weren't carrying it around as
No.
a burden, or you didn't appear to be feeling it as a burden. Was that okay with you, or would you wish they could have related more? Or?
No, it was okay with me. I didn't.
Okay. So, have you been back to Holland again?
Once, back in 1987, I think it was.
You went just yourself, or with family?
With my wife.
With your wife. And what was your feeling when you went back?
It was just nostalgic. Okay. Visiting with family and just showing my wife around.
You still have family there in Holland?
Yeah. So the craziest part of that was, you may think it's crazy, but when my father used to go on business trips to Amsterdam from time to time.
From here?
No, when we were still in Holland.
Oh.
So then sometimes he'd take me, and one of the things I remember was this deli shop where we had the most delicious sandwiches. When we went back to Holland, my wife and I, we headed for that, and guess what? It was a Burger King then. I got so mad.
It was. I didn't hear.
Turned into a Burger King.
Oh no! I was waiting for the story to be. Oh, you're still there, and they still.
Yeah.
Very good.
So,
That's interesting. Do you have feelings? Some people have sometimes feelings towards either in your case, the Dutch or the Germans about the whole experience. Do you harbor any of those kinds of general feelings, positive or negative?
I have no really negative feelings to the Dutch, although I know there were people that were collaborators. I had one friend in school, he was supposed to be my friend, said he couldn't associate with me because I was Jewish. This was after the war now.
After the war.
Yeah.
So even after the war, you were feeling issues, dealing with that.
What's amazing though, he's your friend. I can't associate with you.
So I missed what you said. The feelings you had towards the Dutch were?
They were fine, okay, other than that.
Maybe some individial issues,
Yeah.
you're saying. And to the German people? Your father was German, actually.
Yeah, but I well, nothing to do with that, okay. I wouldn't even want to go to Germany today,
No,
okay.
because
It just doesn't feel right, okay. Listening to a German language and hearing people talk in German just doesn't, it just rattles me, if
makes
you
you
will.
feel, what,
Uncomfortable.
uncomfortable.
Even though I don't know, all the people that are living in Germany now and other leaders in Germany, they were not Nazis, obviously.
It's just still is that uncomfortable feeling
Yes,
being in that.
which is unfair, I know.
So, do you think that your war experiences, and it's not just the war, but the whole immigrant experience, had an effect on either your Jewish faith or your beliefs in any way?
I had no effect on my beliefs, no.
And on your engagement with Judaism?
Pardon me?
On your engagement with Judaism?
No.
No. And what about in terms of your personal relationships, maybe how you raised your children? Do you think that had an effect in that way? Any effect there?
No.
Okay. And you told me you have returned. So I guess the last question I have is, well, two. Why did you come forward now to share your story?
Well, I had wanted I talked to the people here in Rochester from their Holocaust Center, and they had expressed an interest in my talking to them and giving testimony, and it never happened, even though a couple of times I talked to them, and they said they wanted to, and it never happened for some reason or other.
And it was important to you to share the story.
Yes.
So not just now, it's been going on for a little while. As you said, you've gone to school groups and you've talked to school groups. What is it, especially when you go to school groups, what is it that you want the future generations, which is who they are, to understand? Why? What do you want to tell them?
I want them to understand that in the most horrible conditions there are heroes, and there are people that stand up and do what's right, and have courage.
And have courage. Did you get good responses from the students?
Yeah.
Do you feel like you got your message across? That's great. Is there anything that we haven't discussed that you want to make sure you want to share? Is there anything additional?
I want to discuss my father, okay? He's a man of tremendous courage and being able to deal with life as it comes along. I sort of divide his life up into 20-year sections. He was born in 1913, okay? Left Germany in 1933 when Hitler came to power. He was 20 years old.
And he wasn't deported. He just knew he needed to get out of there. Yeah.
We came to Holland, and in 1953 they decided he was 40 at that point. He decided to come here because he he'd lived under Nazism, and there was a definite threat that Russia and the communists might invade, and he didn't want to do that. So he came here. He was a successful businessman in Holland. When he came here, he took a job as a stock boy in Wegmans. So a tremendous, change from being a successful businessman to being a stock boy in a grocery store. And again, tremendous courage to do that. But he wanted us to be safe, because at that time, you remember here, there was this big thing with communism and the McCarthy hearings and that kind of stuff. And he was really afraid that if Russia came and invaded, that we'd be living again underneath a dictatorship, and didn't want to do that. So he went from being a businessman to a stock boy in a grocery store, okay, just to make sure that we would survive and wouldn't have to live under those kinds of circumstances. So he was tremendously courageous, and first of all leaving Germany, and then living in Holland in the war, and then leaving Holland. Okay, I'm looking at,
Starting all over.
just a courageous.
And you said the courage he had to, that both of your parents had to let you go when you were taken into hiding. That's very, very brave. And a lot of sacrifice.
Yes.
Sacrifice his own kind of career in some ways.
Absolutely.
And remind me his name again.
Benno, Benno.
That's them. Okay, thank you for sharing that. Anything else you want to share?
Well, I do want to. Well,
We're going to do that.
Yeah.
So look at the picture.
Well, I wanted to look. I'll talk about the righteous Gentiles.
Yes.
Okay, I've got the talk.
Yeah. Anything else? I mean, you mentioned it, but anything else you want to talk about, share about that? Great.
If you want to hear some specific stories,
Sure.
I can do that. I don't have the search. I have the names of the people. Some of them. I have dozens. Okay. So, but these stories that I share. Okay, there's a whole bunch. Just picking a few at random. There's a guy named Joop Westerveld in Holland who smuggled children from Holland to Spain during the war. Okay, so he's traveling with a bunch of children.
And what was the name again?
Joop Westerveld.
How would you spell that last name?
Wester Ville.
Okay.
Okay. Took these children from Holland, through Holland, Belgium, France, to
Spain.
Spain. They were traveling at night. He hid during the day. And eventually he was caught and went to a concentration camp, but never revealed. And then he was killed there, but he never revealed any of the people that he was dealing with. Okay, a story in Italy after the Germans took over Italy. There was a Father Rufino.
Can you spell that?
What, pardon me?
Can you spell that?
Yeah, Rufino.
Rufino.
He was in, oh God, name of the town escapes me. Assisi, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Sicily?
Assisi.
Oh, Assisi.
Okay, and he ran a whole operation of saving Jews. So Jews who he brought into his town, he hid them in convents in, were Jewish or were, can't think of the name, monasteries, taught them how to behave as Catholics if he could send them out, and if they could live out in the open. He taught them how to live out how to act as Catholics. Okay.
Like to pretend that when they're pretending that they're Catholic.
Yeah, so they could,
That across yourself.
that's kind of stuff, and befriended the German commandant of the town, who probably was, sort of looking the other way. But the story is that he had a bunch of people he was hiding. He wanted to get them out of the country. So he asked the commandant, can he borrow a truck from him? Okay, and so the commandant gave him a truck. Now he told him he just had to take a bunch of these nuns and priests somewhere.
But he was really taking Jews.
He was taking them to get them out of the country. And they gave him a truck with an escort of German soldiers.
Oh, wow.
And he took
Creative.
them. Yeah. And he had two people helping him. There's a printer named Gino Bartelli. And the printer was Louis Di Brisi, and he went to the printer and said, I need to print up false papers, documents such as identification papers, birth certificates, stuff, ration cards. So the printer did that for him. Mm-hmm. And he also distributed those identification papers to other resistance units in Italy. This was after the Germans invaded Italy, by the way. Not
in Italy.
Was not a defense against the Italians, a defense against the Germans, who were at that time had invaded. So the printer provided him with also whatever
false documents
he needed, and then he had this Gino Bartelli, who was a championship racer, bicycle racer, who won the Tour de France in 1938, and again 10 years later in 1948. But he used him to distribute papers to other resistance units, and he could get away with that because he would hide them on his bike. But since he was a very famous hero in Italy, if he was stopped by either the Italian police or the German, they knew who he was. Okay, so they
let him go.
Well, not only that, they wanted to talk to a celebrity, okay, and give him their autographs and stuff like that. So that enabled him to, distribute papers to other resistance units that needed them.
So he must have saved many, many Jews.
Pardon me?
He must have saved many, many Jews.
Yeah. So that's one story, and there are others. Okay, interesting stories. It's a guy named Seuni Sugahara. He was Japanese.
Oh.
And he was.
How do you spell that?
Pardon me?
How do you spell that?
Oh, how do I spell it? Okay, Sugihara. Okay, and he was the Japanese consul in Lithuania, and when the Germans invaded Poland, the Jews, tried to get away, and they went to Lithuania, went to the Japanese embassy there and asked for safe passage to Japan. Well, the Japanese government denied that, but this guy gave them the visas anyway. Okay, so he gave a couple of thousand, I don't know how many were, I think 8,000 or something like that, visas against the orders from the government. So he was, when the government figured that out, he was disgraced and lost his job and whatever.
But he knew that he was taking that risk anyway.
So you know, it's stories, and of course, you probably have heard the story of Denmark.
No, what's the last name?
Denmark.
Oh, Denmark,
The
yeah.
country.
Yeah.
They. One of the unique things about Denmark is that the king that stayed after in Holland, the royal family left the country when the Germans came. In Denmark, the king stayed there, and when the decree came through and the Jews had to wear the stars, he wore the stars, okay, out in public. And a remarkable story, in 1943, I think it was 43, the Germans decided to export the Germans or the Jews from Denmark to the concentration camps. They were tipped off by, of all people, a German businessman. So the whole country got together, okay, and they set up an operation. Step one was to hide the Jews in various places. Step two was to take them to the seashore where they were picked up by fishing boats that took them to Sweden through, I think, the Baltic Sea, where there were German warship patrolling, but they got them. They saved pretty much all the Jews in Denmark that way. And
Just pulled themselves together and said, it's kind of like what the people you asked, why did you do that? Why did you save us? And they said, because of
so the whole country set up this operation and got practically all of the Jews out from Denmark to Sweden in their fishing boats.
Right.
And when they came back, they found that their homes had been preserved. They found churches had preserved things from the synagogue, like the silverware and the Torahs and whatnot.
I didn't know
So
that.
it's a remarkable story.
So they actually welcomed them back.
Pardon me?
They actually welcomed them back.
So all the Jews in Denmark were saved that way.
So it's amazing what people of courage and goodwill. That's really what you're saying.
Yeah.
And in your story is a small example of it. It's just as powerful a story.
Yeah. He compared Denmark to Holland. First of all, the royal family in Holland fled. The king of Denmark stayed, and Denmark had a way to get them out. In other words, they were able to get them to Sweden, which was a neutral country. There's no way that Holland could have set up an operation like that because there's no place for them to go. Okay. So.
Anything else you want to share? We're going to meet your.
Pardon me?
We're going to meet your partner and share.
Yeah, well,
some.
just let me talk, my picture back there.
Yeah, we're going to be doing that.
Pardon me?
We're going to do that. I just
Yeah.
want to make sure everything else is covered. Okay, maybe we should take a break then, and we'll introduce.
You want to talk about this first, or?
No, let's bring Janet in first.
Okay.
Okay. So, Ms.
Okay.
Westheim, would you introduce this lovely woman?
This is my partner, Janet Rothbind. And we've been living together for about 3-4 months by now.
It's very nice.
Yes.
Welcome, Janet.
Thank you.
But
Thank
you've
you.
known each other longer than that.
Not much.
Not much longer.
Oh, no?
We met last April when he was giving a talk about his experiences. And I found that very interesting and wanted to talk to him some more. And so we talked. And then we got to be friends, and we got to be more than friends, and we moved in together.
That's very nice.
It is nice. It's very nice.
So I wonder, I know you weren't hearing this too
Yeah.
much of it probably, but I know you also know Carl's story,
Yes.
and you've heard him speak, so that's
Yes.
great. I just wonder, as his partner now, what your reaction is to thinking about his experiences and how
Well,
this has affected him.
the more I read about the times, and the more I realize he really was lucky that he's even here at all. And that kind of shakes me a little, because nothing keeps the world from going back to that. It's but I'm very glad he's here.
Yeah, he was lucky, and I will say, Carl, it's striking to me that you really the word that comes across from you through all of the stories is that you're grateful. The grateful for having survived and the people who saved you, but even in Rochester for having the opportunities, you come across as a very grateful person, which is
Yes.
a wonderful way to approach life.
Yes.
Really wonderful way to approach life. What is it that you would want Janet to know? Do you think she does know really everything about how this has affected you?
I think she knows pretty well much about the story of the war, yes. I think she knows just about everything.
Do you have any sense of that this has affected? I know you didn't know him before, obviously. But
No, I
this
did.
affected-
He was just. I know when he first was telling me about it, he seemed so positive about the things that had happened to him. My thought first was, oh my God, how did his mother feel when he was
Yeah.
telling? Because I have children, and so I don't know if I would have been as brave as she was.
Yeah, you talk some about your dad, your father, and his experiences, but Mom was in there too. Sure,
It's yes. So
it's very brave.
anyway, we're very lucky.
Anything you want to say to Janet about this?
Well, she says we're lucky. Okay. When I came here, I came here, what, 2020? Oh, no,
Here
20
to this
no,
retirement.
22. We came in 22. I was taking care of friends who were quite a bit older than I am, but they were my best friends. And as they got older, I started helping, taking care of them. Especially after my wife died, we sort of became, even though we'd been friends for a long time, we became family. Okay, we're eating dinner. I was cooking dinner for them and running errands, helping them.
Before you came here, you mean?
Before I came here. Okay, and then eventually the husband died, my best friend, and the wife had dementia. So they had a housekeeper who at that point then moved in with them as a permanent housekeeper, and she, the wife at that time had no dementia, and she took care of them, of her lovingly, okay, like it was her own mother. And so I was the what do you call it? Financial.
The what?
I was taking care of her finances and
Oh, the
everything.
executor?
Yeah. So the two of us, especially after he died, and she had dementia, the two of us really took good care of her. Okay, and the woman actually quit her job to work full time for her, and lovingly took care of her. So the two of us did that. She doing the major part, and then when Sylvia's the woman, she had dementia very badly, which was very sad because she was one of the smartest persons I ever knew. Okay, and to see somebody like that have dementia, and when she died, she was operating like at a 4-year-old level. Okay, so but we took after my friend died, we thought that she would die wouldn't last very long, but she lasted a year and a half. So two of us pretty much took care of her. And then when she died, all of a sudden I was all alone, okay, in my
That was your big focus, a big purpose for you.
I was alone. So then I decided to find a place to live, to come here, which was wonderful. And, we moved over here. But even here, with all these people around, in your apartment by yourself, essentially you're still by yourself, okay? You see the people during the day at various activities, but at night you go back to the apartment and you're by yourself, okay? And then I met her, and we sort of developed a friendship, and eventually decided to move in together, which was absolutely wonderful. It's so fantastic in terms of, first of all, being with somebody you love and that you can take care of, and who takes care of you. But not being alone in an apartment here, even though there are a couple of hundred people living here. If you don't have this connection like I have here, you're still sitting in your apartment by yourself at night.
Mm-hmm. Okay, activities are activities, but a partnership is a partnership.
Exactly.
That's what you're saying. So you're lucky again.
I'm lucky again,
you
yes.
like to find each other.
Absolutely grateful.
I think he looks for the positive. He looks for the lucky, and he just has, evidently all his life, tried to find the best side. And that's really nice to live with.
Mm-hmm. It's one of the things that is attractive, I'm sure.
Yes.
Yeah, that definitely came through in the interview.
So the person who's in charge of all the activities here, I think she wants to show off us living as a couple. So when we had this Valentine's dance here last week, the television stations were here, and she arranged for us to be interviewed for her purposes, to show off the place
it's a nice
here.
place to come.
Nice place to come. Find your love.
So we were interviewed, and people could find the interview on the website of the stations.
That must have been nice, though.
Yes.
Very sweet. Anything else you want to share with each other? We want to look at the photo too. But...
Nothing,
I think so.
Okay. All right. Thank you for joining us, Janet. We'll break.
So this is my family tree. Okay, so on my side, on the left side is my family. Okay, my grandfather, who I didn't know, he died in 1930. Okay, is my father's father, and my grandmother, Sophie, who survived the war also in hiding. And after we came here, she came and visited a couple of times. I think she came when we got married, and then after my youngest son was born, she was here. And those over here are my grandparents on my mother's side. They're the ones that was in a concentration camp. As I said, I think it was Theresienstadt. I'm not 100% sure. And they, and I think I mentioned they came back. I remember seeing them, like walking skeletons, but they survived, and we lived for part of the time after the war. We lived in their house with them, and they both of them lived into their 80s. So, maybe the war helped them. I don't know, get stronger. But anyway, they both lived into their 80s. And then here's my parents, my father, who I talked about. And again, I talked about his courage. To note that my mother she had myasthenia gravis, a very difficult disease to deal with. So she was sick most of the time. So my father had to, take care of her too, and then that's again added to his way of being able to solve problems and to take care and take care of her and live his life. Okay.
And this is your
And this, my wife Kay. So she, this is her family. Her name was Miller, so these are her grandparents. They were Michael Miller, her grandparents, and her cousin, her grandson, were involved in politics. Michael Miller, at one point, was the leader of the Democratic Party here in Monroe County. He was a judge. Okay, and then my wife's, grandparents on her mother's side were also in politics. Again, Democratic politics. And Jacob was, at one point, I think, a work leader here in town. And he was a representative at the 1944 Democratic convention that nominated Roosevelt for the fourth time. Okay.
That's a little history in this family.
Yeah. So, and I'm not sure. I think there were 6 with my father-in-law. There were 6 siblings, and 5 of them ran a soda pop bottling company here in town, and that's closed up after everybody died, but they were quite well known in town. And one of the things they did was supply soda to the local Lilac Festival here that runs every...
Oh yeah, Lilac Festival in Rochester.
And my wife used to go with her father and deliver the pop there. So...
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know any of these people. Okay. I saw them at Yad Vashem, and the amazing thing to me was that, I'd been toward Yad Vashem, very, very emotional experience, of course. And so at the end of the day, I was sort of walking around processing what had been going on. And all of a sudden, I hear this laughter and people, having fun. And I thought to myself, how the hell can they do that right here? Okay. Don't they know what this place represents? And they saw me, they came over to me and started posing. They wanted me to take their picture. And I did that. And when I looked through the viewfinder and focused on them, all of a sudden it occurred to me it was okay for them to sit here and be there and play and have fun, because these are young people. They represented the survival of the Jewish people. Okay, so my first reaction was, how the hell can they do this? But then I realized these people represented not only the survival of us in the war, but also young people being the future of Jewish people, and specifically kids in Israel. So that turned out, even though my first reaction was negative, after I thought about it, that was something really important to think about.
I mean, I can say to the viewer that this is hanging on your living room wall.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just a casual picture. It means something to you, a lot to you.
Mm-hmm.
The future of the Jewish people and the joy.
Yeah.
I think it has to be joy.
So when I first started giving the talks at schools, I didn't have this thing, so I could only describe the picture, but then I made this, and so if I give a talk now, I'll just take it along and show it to people.
That's great.
But it's
Okay. Thank
It's
you
a-
very, 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 very much.